Returning to Inside the Philippines, I'm happy you've joined us. Tonight's feature isn't the kind of story we usually cover. There's no nightlife worker in revealing clothes, no online romance fraudster juggling multiple foreign partners, and no clear antagonist. That's precisely why it deserves your attention. Our focus tonight is Brendan, a 55-year-old mason from Limerick, Ireland. For 3 decades, he laid bricks on construction sites across Dublin, Birmingham, and Manchester until his body wore out and the jobs dried up. He's a reserved man, broad hands, a gentle voice, the type who's always let his work speak for itself. Then, in February 2024, he boarded a flight to Cebu with a 2-week vacation planned and no clue what lay ahead. What unfolded for Brendan wasn't a con. Let's make that clear from the start. He wasn't mugged. No one extorted him. He never uncovered a betrayal. What unfolded was, in many respects, even harder to bear. No clear villain to blame. No satisfying resolution where justice is served. Just an unassuming mason, a gentle woman in a modest town near Cebu City, and an unseen cultural divide that no one warned him about until he'd already crossed it. By the moment another foreigner pulled him aside in a bar at IT Park and put into words what would later name this story, Brendan had already surrendered more than he could spare. Not in a single blow, but piece by piece, like laying bricks. And that's the detail that will linger with some of you. If you've spent nights scrolling through videos about retiring in the Philippines, if you've been exchanging messages with someone for months, if you've convinced yourself you're too level-headed to fall for it, Brendan's experience is one you should listen to. This is a quiet kind of sorrow. No pyrotechnics. Just a man gradually realizing that love and wealth carry different weights depending on where you are. This is his account, told in his own voice. All right then, where to begin? Maybe with the injury. Because if my back hadn't given out, I'd still be on a scaffold in Birmingham, grumbling about the rain and the cost of a beer, just like I had for 3 decades. I left Limerick at 24, some work back home, but never enough. The guys I knew were heading to Dublin or over to England, so I followed. Bricklaying. My father was a bricklayer, his father before him. It wasn't a choice, not really. More like something that just was if you grew up where I did. 30 years of the same routine. Alarm at 5, thermos of tea, 2 slices of toast, out the door before dawn, on site by 6:30, mixing, laying, pointing, lads ribbing each other all day. Cork boys mocking the Limerick lot, Limerick boys giving it back, everyone taking the piss out of the English foreman. Tea break at 10, take a break for lunch at 11:30, wrap up work by 4:00. If it happened to be Friday, maybe grab a beer or 2 on the way back. That was my routine, my entire routine. I won't claim it was anything special, because it wasn't. But there was something to it. At the end of the day, you'd step back and see a wall standing where there'd been nothing that morning, and you'd know you'd built it. There aren't many jobs where you rely on just your hands like this. Single people always ask me about it, and I never know what to say. The work was my partner, I guess, though it didn't share me easily. You're out the door before dawn on a Saturday to catch the 8 a.m. train to Coventry, so meeting someone wasn't exactly on the cards. I had a long relationship with a woman from Tipperary in my 30s, but she wanted children and I wasn't ready. By the time I was, she'd married a police officer. That was the end of that. Then, in February 2023, my back gave out on a job in Salford while moving a pallet, something I shouldn't have been lifting at 53. Felt something snap, couldn't stand straight for 2 days. Surgery in May, physio over the summer. The specialist told me straight in the autumn, Brendan, you won't be laying another brick in your life. Time to find something else, like it was just another option on a shelf. So I went back to Ennis. My sister Bridget had a spare room. Her boys had moved out, and her husband Mick was away in Cork during the week. She said, stay until you figure things out. I told her 3 weeks. That's where I still am. Half a year. No need to dwell on those months. There's nothing worth recounting. That's the reality of it. You wake at 10:30, because why bother rising at dawn? You flip on loose women because what else is there? By 1 o'clock you're cracking open a Bulmers, then noon, then 11. Bridget never mentioned it. Bless her. But I'd catch her eyeing the recycling bin on Sundays, and the weight of it would settle in. The final push came from YouTube. I was awake at 3 in the morning, restless, my back aching, mindlessly flipping through videos. Then one started playing automatically, a guy with an Aussie accent, sipping a San Miguel while the sun set over Mactan, explaining how €1,000 a month stretched far in that part of the world. I kept watching. One video led to another, and before I knew it, 3 months had passed. The Philippines, a Catholic nation, English was widely spoken. The women in the footage had warm, genuine smiles in their eyes. It wasn't like Thailand at all. I'd considered Thailand before. Just rows of Germans in tiny swimwear and British tourists stumbling out of neon-lit clubs. That wasn't my scene. I'm the type who'd rather be at church on a Sunday, even if I don't always make it. Still, at 3 in the morning, I booked the ticket. I waited a week to tell Bridget. When I did, she just stared at me for a while before saying, "Brendan, take care out there, yeah?" She always saw things clearer than I did. That was January. By February 20, I was on a flight to Cebu, with 2 weeks off work and a loose plan. Maybe I'd stay longer if it lived up to the videos. It did, so I stayed. I stepped off. Mactan Airport at 1 in the morning is an experience you don't easily forget. The moment the cabin doors open and the air hits you, it's hard to put into words for anyone who hasn't been there. It isn't the dry heat of Spain. It's thick, damp, and completely suffocating. I'd been wearing a sweater because the aircraft was freezing, but within 2 minutes of walking down the jet bridge, I was tearing it off, my shirt already plastered to my back. I remember thinking, Lord, what have I gotten myself into? Fortunately, getting through passport control was a breeze. The officer who processed my 30-day entry grinned and said, "Welcome to the Philippines, sir," then waved me through. I grabbed my lone suitcase from the conveyor and stepped into the arrivals area, where a crowd pressed against the barrier. Dozens of faces, placards in hand, voices rising in Tagalog or Cebuano, a language I couldn't place. A baby wailed somewhere. An elderly man with a karaoke mic hawked what might have been SIM cards or snacks. I'd arranged a ride through the app, just like the travel vlogger suggested, but spent 20 minutes circling the pickup spot, drenched in sweat, while a parade of drivers called out, "Sir, taxi? Sir, taxi? Best rate for you." My hotel was in Mandaue, a modest place, nothing extravagant. I'd reserved it for 2 weeks because the vlogger swore it was a solid home base, close to Cebu City but easier on the wallet. And really, what other advice did I have? The driver, a soft-spoken guy named Joseph, played country music the whole ride after catching my accent. Garth Brooks, non-stop, all the way to the hotel. Filipinos have a deep appreciation for country music, something I discovered after arriving. Many know Kenny Rogers songs better than I ever did. The first few days were a blur. I wandered aimlessly, overwhelmed by the heat. By 10 a.m. I'd already retreated to my hotel, collapsing under the air conditioning with a large plastic bottle of water. I had no direction, no real purpose. The trip had been booked on impulse, and I was simply waiting for some instinct to guide me. By the 3rd day, though, I began to find my footing. Discovered a tiny eatery nearby serving chicken and rice for around 90 pesos, roughly €1.50 or 60, depending on the exchange rate. Stopped by a 7-Eleven for some drinks. Then there was SM City Cebu Mall, an absolute behemoth. It felt like its own district, complete with a chapel tucked between a pharmacy and a bookstore, almost like a miniature cathedral. One afternoon, I ducked into Mass there just to escape the heat, and the place was packed, easily 200 people on a weekday, right in the middle of a mall. It left an impression, I won't lie. Oh, and the bakery. There was a small spot a couple of streets from the hotel, one of those local chains, maybe Julie's Bake Shop. The name's fuzzy now. By the 4th or 5th morning, I wandered in for their breakfast pandesal, those little bread rolls, and a coffee. The woman behind the counter had her hair pulled back and was absorbed in a paperback, barely glancing up when I walked in. No smile, no acknowledgement, just lost in her book between customers. Hadn't played the usual eye contact game the way women in those bars did. By that point, I'd already been to a couple, just to look around, and every time, I'd leave feeling ancient and vaguely ashamed, if I'm being straight about it. This one didn't even glance up. Took my order, handed me my change, went right back to her book. That's the real reason I came back the next day, because she acted like I wasn't even there. Doesn't sound all that romantic when you put it like that, but that's how it was. Third morning she remembered me. Pain de sal and a black coffee, sir. Just like that. Smiled this time, but it was the kind of smile you'd get from a cashier at the grocery store back home. Polite and nothing more. By the fourth morning we'd actually spoken, maybe 10 words total. What's your name, sir? Brendan. Where are you from, sir? Ireland. She gave a nod as if she knew exactly where it was, which, as I eventually learned, most of them did. It seemed like half of them had a cousin working as a nurse in Galway. Her name was Maravich Tagallo. She finally told me on the 5th day when I asked. She claimed she was 29, though I later discovered she was actually 31. She'd knocked a couple of years off her age, and honestly, I don't blame her. Women do that the world over. She came from a place called Talis, just south of the city, where she lived with her mother and 2 nephews. Her father had passed away when she was only 19, and being the oldest of 4, she worked at the bakery 6 days a week. She earned 500 pesos a day. That's roughly €8 for a 12-hour shift. I actually had to make her repeat that twice because I thought I'd misheard. €8 a day. I'd spent more than that on a basic sandwich at Heathrow. On the 6th or 7th morning, I asked her if she'd like to grab a coffee somewhere away from her workplace. I was blushing furiously, stammering like an awkward schoolboy. She stared at me for a long, quiet moment before agreeing. But there were conditions. It had to be a Sunday, her sole day off, and her mother would need to know exactly who I was. Could I write down my name and the place I was staying for her mother? She kept repeating that phrase, for her mother. Now, look, I realize how this sounds as I'm sitting here telling you this. I know exactly what you're thinking. The mother angle, the request to write down my details, it sounds like a classic setup, Brendan. It's the opening scene of a predictable script. That's how these things always start. Yet you weren't present. You didn't witness her expression. There was no performance in it. I'd stake my life on that, even now. Despite all that's happened, she was simply a girl raised with the same warning every Limerick woman heard. Never leave with a man without letting someone know. That's not deception. It's how many of us were taught. Back when I was still a boy, we crossed paths on a Sunday at a Mandow Jollibee. She had on a bright yellow top, her hair loose for once, and asked for their chicken joy. I ended up ordering the same thing since I wasn't sure what else to pick. We spent 2 hours chatting about random things. Her siblings, my job, Ireland, the reason I was there. Near the end, she leaned forward and rested her hand on mine for a brief moment, giving it a light squeeze. Then she said, "Tito Brendan, you've got a gentle face." I found out later that Tito means uncle, what kids call their mother's brother, or what families use for an older man they've welcomed into their fold. Standing in that Jollibee branch, I had no idea what was coming. Her words just struck me as kind. Now that single word keeps replaying in my head. Tito. I should have asked what it meant. I didn't. By then, it was the second Sunday I'd stretched my hotel stay another 2 weeks, telling myself I needed space to clear my head. When she asked if I'd come down to Talisay to meet her mother, just for lunch, she said, Nane was cooking adobo. The nephews were eager to meet the Irish guy. I agreed before she even finished speaking. Talisay's a half-hour drive south of Cebu City, assuming traffic cooperates, which it rarely does. We split the trip, part by jeepney, the rest by tricycle, the way she always traveled. I wasn't about to order a grab and make her walk ahead of me to her own home like some kind of foreign dignitary. The jeepney was jammed, Easily 16 people crammed into a space meant for 10. An elderly woman clutched a live chicken plasting. This is honestly heartbreaking to witness. Drop a comment if you've seen anything like this back home. In a plastic bag on her lap, two schoolgirls in matching blue uniforms shared a phone, thumbs flying over the screen. A guy in his 20s had a speaker blasting OPM ballads at full volume. Maravik explained OPM stood for Original Filipino Music, and I loved how that sounded. Original Filipino music. Every love song imaginable filled the air. The place sat in a neighborhood tucked away from the main street. You wound through a labyrinth of narrow concrete paths. Apology shops dotted every corner. Children shot hoops on a rusted rim bolted to a coconut palm. Stray dogs roamed freely. Roosters crowed relentlessly, even in broad daylight. Somewhere, a karaoke machine blared. Total eclipse of the heart of all things. I couldn't help but laugh hearing Bonnie Tyler in that setting. Marovich's home stood at the end of a row, 2 rooms of rough concrete, its walls textured with that coarse, pebbled finish, the corrugated roof held together by plastic scraps and old grain sacks. Out front, a small yard held a hand pump well and a clothesline heavy with laundry. No glass in the windows, just wooden shutters propped open with sticks. Next door, an auntie ran one of those modest little shops. I'd get to know Auntie Linda properly later, but that's another part of the story. Nani Cora was already waiting at the door, a petite woman, barely 5 feet tall, her iron gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. She wore a worn floral house dress. When I reached her, she took my hands in hers, locked eyes with me, and said in clearer English than most of my cousins, "Tito Brendan, you are welcome in our home. Marovic has told me good things about you. Please, you sit. You eat." That was it for me, I think. The handshake at the door. I'd been a long time without anyone taking my hands in both of theirs and looking at me like I mattered. The 2 nephews, Jomar, who was 8, and Kit, who was 10, were on me inside of 10 minutes. I'd brought them a packet of Cadbury's chocolate fingers I'd picked up at the airport in Heathrow on a whim, and that was the masterstroke. Sure, they'd never seen anything like them. Jamar climbed up on the arm of the sofa to look at the writing on the box kit. Asked me if I had a son in Ireland. I said no. He looked at me serious as a judge and said, "Tito Brendan, you can be our Tito here. I'm not going to lie to you. I had to look out the window for a minute." The dish was the most incredible meal I'd had in decades. Tender pork shoulder braised in soy and vinegar, garlic and bay leaves, piled over steamed rice with a crispy fried egg on top. Nani Cora kept heaping more onto my plate every time I made progress, insisting, "Eat, Tito. You're too skinny. You need rice." At 16 stone, I'd never once been told I was underweight in my life. I polished off every bite until I could barely move, yet she still tried to serve me more. Mid-meal she slipped something into my palm beneath the table. A rosary, its wooden beads darkened and polished smooth by years of use. She pressed it into my palm and told me, "This belonged to my husband, Tito. He passed when Marovic was 19. I believe he'd have approved of you. Keep it. I'm not one to show emotion." Back in Birmingham, the crew would have sworn I never flinched, even when I snapped my finger setting a lintel and worked the rest of the shift in silence. But I had to turn away, stare at the wall for a long moment before I could find my voice to thank her. The next Sunday, Palm Sunday, late March of 2024, we all went to Mass together. Marovic, Nani Cora, the boys, and me, climbing the hill to the parish church in Talisay, palm fronds in hand. The place was overflowing, standing room only at the rear, the air thick and stifling. Sweat stung my eyes, my only decent shirt clinging to my back. The priest's sermon switched between English and Cebuano, but the cadence was familiar, like the Mass I'd known since childhood in St. John's Parish in Limerick. The same motions. Kneel, stand, kneel. A quiet tear slipped out during the consecration. Just one. No one noticed, or if Nani Cora did, she had the grace to let it pass. I hadn't set foot in a church since my mother's funeral in 2018. I'd forgotten how it could unravel a man. The first payment arrived 2 weeks later. The moment didn't unfold like a simple favor. It was my doing. I was the one who brought it up. One night at the Carindaria, I turned to her and said, "Maravik, why keep grinding away in that bakery for 500 pesos a day? Why not walk away? Stay with me. I'll take care of you." She fell silent, the kind of quiet that stretches too long. Then softly she asked, "Tito, are you serious? My mom and the kids rely on what I earn. Walking away isn't an option." I asked her, "What's the bare minimum you'd need each month to manage at home? Just enough so we can be together the right way." She worked it out in her head, lips moving silently, then said 8,000 pesos, around 130 euros. That's less than I used to drop on a single week's lunches back on site. Practically nothing. I handed it to her that night in an envelope. She took it with both hands, and the tears came. Real ones. The kind that well up from somewhere deep. "No one's ever been this good to me, Tito," she said. "No one's ever..." She couldn't even finish. I just told her not to make a big deal out of it. It's nothing, really. I couldn't grasp, sitting in that small eatery, what had just happened. I believed I was doing the right thing, helping someone leave a difficult situation. I thought I was showing kindness. Instead, I'd become the one covering the expenses, not just hers, the entire household's, the boys, the neighbor's aunt, because the food came from the same pot. I had no idea. All I knew was that I'd made her cry in a way that felt like relief, and now I'd always have a seat at that table if I wanted one. And God help me, that seemed like everything. The call came at 2:20 on a Tuesday in May. I remembered the exact time because I'd only been asleep for about an hour. The hotel's air conditioning had failed, and I'd been lying there in my underwear, sweating into the sheets, debating whether to just buy a cheap fan. It was Marovic. She was sobbing so hard I couldn't make out the first few words. I bolted upright in bed, trying to calm her down. "Tito Jomar, he's sick. He's in the hospital. Dengue. They think he might not make it. They're asking for 45,000 pesos for the deposit, and we don't have it. Mama's breaking down. Please, please, can you come?" I was in a ride-hailing car within 10 minutes, throwing on yesterday's shorts and a t-shirt, not even bothering to brush my teeth. The driver glanced at me, disheveled, barefoot except for flip-flops, and didn't say a word. "Vicente Soto Memorial. As fast as you can." It was a public hospital. Vicente Soto. A massive concrete building on Bay Rodriguez Street. Until that evening, I'd never set foot in a medical facility in the Philippines. And let me say, it wasn't anything like Limerick Regional. The hallways were packed. Relatives sprawled on makeshift beds of flattened boxes, a mother nursing an infant in a cracked plastic seat. The air carried the sharp tang of cleaning solution, along with something fainter beneath it, something I chose to ignore. Overhead, the flickering fluorescents hummed. I finally located them in a crowded ward on the upper level. 6 cots stood in a row, no partitions between them. The unshielded windows let in the breeze. Jomar lay closest to the wall, his tiny hand secured with tape to an IV line, his skin ashen. When I entered, he turned toward me and managed a faint, hopeful smile, as if I were the rescue he'd been waiting for. That smile nearly undid me. Maravik was in tears. Nanay Cora clutched the wooden rosary I'd once returned to her, murmuring prayers over its beads. At the nurse's station, a man in scrubs politely informed me, "The deposit is 45,000 pesos, sir. Without it, we can't proceed with the platelet treatment. Payment can be made downstairs. Cash, card, it's all the same." I descended to the counter, swiped my card for the amount, 45,000 pesos, roughly 730 euros. The machine chirped, the receipt rolled out. The clerk behind the desk offered a knowing nod, as if he'd witnessed this moment countless times before. I'm certain he had. I returned to the upper floor. That moment stays with me. Jomar wasn't pretending. He truly had dengue. He lay in a real hospital bed with an IV drip. No matter what unfolded afterward, that much was undeniable. I saw him there. I took his tiny hand in mine. He was just 8 years old, gravely sick, and I had a payment card that could change everything. What choice did I have? Sit there with my hands in my pockets. He came home from the hospital 5 days later. Nanay Cora made me come down to Talis and sit at the table and eat the kare-kare she'd cooked. And she wouldn't stop saying, "Tito Brendan, you saved him. God sent you to us, you saved him." It went straight to my head. Of course it did. A fortnight after that, Typhoon Agon came through. It wasn't a direct hit on Cebu. More of a clip, but it was enough. The wind came in for 2 nights, and the rain was sideways, and the patched roof on the Talisay house, which I'd seen for myself, was held together. With rice sacks and prayer gave way over Nanay Cora's bedroom, half of it just opened up to the sky. They had to move her bed into the front room and put basins everywhere. Maravish didn't ask me. I want that on the record. She did not ask. She rang me to tell me they were all fine. The boys were fine. The cousins from up the road were over, helping with the tarpaulins, and they'd manage it, was the cousin Tito boy. Older fella ran a small motorbike repair place, who said it on the 3rd day in passing, when I was over there helping shift wet furniture. "Kuya," he said, "maybe over the next year and a half, we can fix it slowly. Piece by piece, get it done." I went back to the hotel that night and didn't sleep. Lay there staring at the ceiling, and what I was seeing was that small woman, that tiny woman, who'd taken my hands and put her dead husband's rosary in my palm, sleeping in her front room, with a pail catching the drip from the ceiling. And I'd been a bricklayer for 30 years. I knew exactly what that roof needed. I could cost it out in my head before the sun came up. New trusses, galvanized steel sheets, proper guttering. Redo that scabby bathroom. While you're at it, because the wall there's gone in the morning. I went down to Talisay with a notebook. I priced the materials at a place in Talisay called City Hardware, and I got a recommendation for a local mason from Tito Boy. Fella called Joel ran a small crew, 3 lads under him. I sat with Joel under a mango tree drinking instant coffee, and we talked it through, mason to mason. He didn't know what I was at first. When I pointed out where the old trusses had failed and why his eyebrows went up, and he said, "Kuya, you are in the building, Diba." I told him about the 30 years. He grinned and said, "Okay, then we do this proper, you and me." The total came in at 180,000 pesos, about 2,900 euros. I paid Joel half up front, half on completion, and I went there every single day for 11 days, while the lads worked, and I made the tea and ran the materials. And at the end of it, Nane Cora's bedroom had a proper roof over it. For the first time in 20 years, I felt better than I'd felt since the back went. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. Standing there at the end of the 11th day, looking at a finished roof, I'd had a hand in with Joel, slapping me on the shoulder, and Jomar running up to show me a drawing he'd made of the house, with me standing beside it. That was a proper day. That was a man being useful again. By July, I'd given up the hotel and moved into a small condo in IT Park, 28,000 pesos a month, about 450 euros, modern building, decent security, a little gym I never used. Maravich stayed over 4 nights a week, went home to Nanay Cora, the other 3. We dined at nice restaurants during that time. One spot in Ayala Center, Abaca, stood out, great seafood, and the bill for both of us came to around 2,500 pesos. I also began setting aside 20,000 pesos each month just for Nanay Cora. A mother shouldn't have to depend on her child, I thought. She deserves her own independence. By the time I renewed the lease, I had about 60,000 euros saved. One lazy Sunday, over a San Miguel, I scribbled some quick calculations on a napkin. 8,000 pesos for Maravik, 20,000 for Nanay. Bills, groceries, the occasional meal out. At that pace, I thought I had enough to last for ages. Literally years. That was when Tito's son gave me a friendly pat on the back one night and said, "Kuya, you've got to hear this. Your kindness is the talk of the neighborhood. Everyone's heard about you and that roof. Everyone. He intended it as praise, and I accepted it that way. That phrase has stayed with me. Notoriety in the neighborhood. There's a type you'd rather avoid. The sort where people start whispering about the fair-skinned foreigner at the end of the lane who'll patch your roof if you're polite. I hadn't realized it yet. I was too busy feeling satisfied. August was when I stopped keeping track. That's the simplest way to put it. Until July, I'd scribbled rough figures on a scrap of paper. By August, the paper was gone, and the favors had woven themselves into the rhythm of the week, like laundry. You didn't question them, you just handled them as they piled up. The first real expense was school. Kit was beginning 5th grade, Jamar 3rd, and the Catholic Academy up the street, Sacred Hearts or something like that, was better than the public option. Marievich brought it up during Sunday lunch, almost as if she were musing aloud. If you think this is bad, hit like so more people see what's really going on here. 18,000 pesos for the term, both boys, around 290 euros. I told her to enroll them, of course. What else would they do? I transferred the money from my Revolut to her Gcash that afternoon and didn't give it another thought for at least 10 minutes. Then there was Auntie Linda's Sorry store next door, run by Marievich's aunt. If you're unfamiliar, these are the tiny shops set up in people's homes. Bars on the counter, shelves stocked with crisps, shampoo sachets, instant noodles, loose cigarettes, and a cooler of ice for sodas. All summer, Auntie Linda's supplies had been dwindling because her supplier demanded payment up front, and she didn't have it. Marievich mentioned it one evening over a San Miguel, her voice casual. If Auntie has steady stock, she has steady income. Then she won't have to ask Mama, and Mama won't have to ask me. It made sense the way she said it. 15,000 pesos, about 240 euros, to restock for 3 months. I covered it. Then there was her cousin, Raymark, 24, the son of an aunt I hadn't met yet. He had a job interview in Manila, a call center position in Ortigas, a real shot at something better. He needed the fare to get there, but flights were sold out, so it was the boat from Cebu to Manila instead. 4,500 pesos. He also needed a place to stay for the first week, 8,000 pesos, and a new outfit for the interview, since his only decent trousers had a rip. 2,000 more. Roughly 14,500 pesos in all, around 235 euros. I covered the cost. He traveled to Manila but returned after 2 weeks without the position. As it turned out, there was another interview scheduled for the next month, this time in Makati. Would I help again? So I did. The family needed a new home washing machine. Their previous one had stopped working. It had been a second-hand top loader when Marevich's father purchased it back in the 90s. With 3 active boys and 3 women in the household, the laundry had become overwhelming. The replacement cost 22,000 pesos, roughly 350 euros. They picked it up from SM Appliance. Meanwhile, phone credits were always in short supply, with small top-ups of 500 pesos here and there, 500 pesos here and there. Individually, each expense seemed minor, but my Revolut records showed 4 or 5 such entries weekly. The annual town fiesta in late August, Marovich's mother's home village in northern Cebu, meant the entire family would travel for 3 days. Preparations included pasalubong gifts, the family's share of the lechon, and van rental to transport everyone, totaling 25,000 pesos, or roughly 400 euros. Then there was the memorial mass for Marovich's father, held 4 months after the typhoon had damaged the roof. The 15th anniversary of his passing called for a church service in Talisay and a gathering at the house afterward. No Filipino death anniversary meal is complete without lechon, a whole roasted pig costing 8,000 pesos alone. Add in rice, noodles, cake, and drinks for 40-plus relatives, and the total came to about 18,000 pesos, or around 290 euros. Looking back at these figures now, they seem staggering. At the time, though, they didn't feel that way. They just piled up one by one. 18,000 pesos here, 22,000 there, 4,500 for a bus ticket wouldn't even raise an eyebrow. I could drop 22,000 on a washing machine for a petite woman who'd been struggling for 2 decades and still feel like I'd done something worthwhile by midweek. But when you stepped back, the bigger picture became clear. By early September, I was shelling out around 90,000 pesos monthly, plus or minus, about 1,450 euros. That was on top of my 28,000 peso condo, groceries, drinks, the occasional takeout, and the odd meal at Abaca, or wherever Marovich wanted to go. All told, it added up to roughly 2,200 euros a month. I'd been in the country for 7 months. My Irish state pension supplements were coming in, though I hadn't yet reached full retirement age. The union pension only contributed 900 euros a month. The rest was draining my savings. I'd never tracked expenses in a spreadsheet before. Bricklayers don't plan for the year. They think in weekly paychecks. Weekends meant paychecks arriving, followed by bills disappearing. Whatever remained was what you had to work with, and if it wasn't enough, you found extra shifts on Saturdays. That had been my reality for 3 decades. I wasn't built for this kind of grind anymore. Then there was my brother. It was a Wednesday night at the condo. We'd just finished eating at that Filipino chicken spot with the endless rice. Marovich was lounging on the couch, legs folded under her, thumbing through Facebook. And she said, casual as anything, "Kuya, my brother Edwin, he is coming home next month. From Bohol. He has been away." I hadn't known there was a brother. I said, "Oh, away where?" She didn't look up from the phone. "He was in CIW," she said. "Cebu Provincial. Just a small thing, Kuya. He had struggled with substance abuse before, but now he's different." He turned to faith while incarcerated. The prison chaplain even drafted a letter supporting his release. I stayed quiet, listening. I was aware of other detention centers in Cebu. I could name a few, and Bohol had its own facility. I also knew CIW was a women's prison, even back then. But I didn't speak up. Maybe she meant CPDRC, or perhaps she just mixed up the letters. Either way, the topic was imprisonment. The man returning from rehab. I should have pressed for details. At 30, the version of me working those Birmingham construction jobs would have dug deeper. He'd have wanted specifics, what substances, how long, the home life now, whether there was a partner, children, financial troubles. The 55-year-old me, sitting in my condo, just nodded and muttered, "Well, every family's got one. Like the one on my father's side back in Limerick. Who knows why? 2 of my cousins did time in Cork prison during the 90s. It's just how things go sometimes." She glanced up at me, her eyes glistening slightly, and said, "Kuya, I'm grateful you're not upset. He'll need support when he gets out. Just enough to start over." I told her, "Yeah, of course." That week, I found out what was really going on. It started with a notification from the banking app, right when I least expected it. I was in the bathroom, to be honest. There I was, late at night, 10:30, mindlessly scrolling on my phone, when the alert popped up. AIB, account balance update, 24,800 euros. Back in July, I'd had 60,000 sitting there. Somehow, I'd gone through 35,000 in just 2 months, without even noticing. It all added up, no tally needed. The roof repairs, hospital bills, school tuition, the fiesta costs, the washing machine, Auntie Linda's investments, my cousin's bus tickets, my own rent, my meals. 180,000 pesos here, 45,000 there, 90,000 vanishing every month like water down a drain. I stayed on the toilet for ages, then wandered into the kitchen, cracked open a San Miguel, and stood by the sliding door. Outside, the glow of IT Park lit up the night. The office building still half alive at 11, the basketball court below where the guys played under the floodlights. I muttered to myself, actually speaking the words aloud in the empty condo, "Brendan, you've got to talk to her this week." But I didn't. Not that week, not the next. Then, on Sunday, Bridget's message popped up from Ennis. "Just checking. Are you home for Christmas? Mick's brother's back from Australia for 2 weeks. Would be great to have everyone together. I read it 3 times, flipped the phone face down on the counter, no idea what to say. It was a Tuesday in mid-October when I walked into the walkabout. To be honest, I hadn't planned on going. By then, I'd been in Cebu 8 months, deliberately avoiding the expat crowd. You'd see them in the Ayala food court, the flushed, middle-aged men in their bargain polo shirts with much younger Filipinas, grumbling about the AC or the cost of a steak. That's not me, I'd think. I'm different. I've got a girlfriend who goes to church. I have a family I share Sunday lunch with. I stand apart. Arrogance, my mother called it. The most dangerous of the sins. That Tuesday, I had no stomach for the Talisay route. Maravich had invited me over because Auntie Linda's spouse, Tito Reggie, was visiting from Bohol and was eager to connect with the well-known Tito Brendan. I could already picture the scene, the flattery, the tandoy poured into my glass, and by the second drink, the inevitable request, how Tito Reggie's young relative, Princess, needed funds for her tuition at a Tagbilaran university. Would Tito Brendan turn out to be a good thing? I called Maravich and told her I wasn't feeling great. I'd swing by Friday instead. She sounded let down, but she didn't press the issue. That was her way. She never insisted. The pressure always came from someone else, and that was the brilliance of it, even if I doubt anyone ever meant it to work like that. I strolled the 4 blocks from the apartment to the walkabout. It's an Aussie-style pub in IT Park, with imitation tin roofing overhead, schooners on the tables, and rugby on the screen, though half the guys in there probably couldn't have listed 2 teams. I took a seat at the bar's edge and asked for a San Miguel and a steak sandwich. Trev occupied the stool 2 down, his Geordie drawl as rich as molasses. He looked to be in his 60s, skin weathered like leather, close-cropped white hair, a wedding band on his finger. A stack of documents lay open in front of him, scribbled over in ballpoint. The conversation started when he flagged the bartender for HP sauce. I smirked and told him he wouldn't find that in IT Park. His reply came quick. "Lad, I've tracked down HP sauce in far rougher spots than this." And just like that, we were talking. He worked as a scuba instructor, operating a modest dive center in Moal Boal, roughly 3 hours' drive from Cebu City. The area was known for its excellent wreck dives. He'd spent 12 years living in the Philippines and had married a woman named Imelda from Negros. Her 2 adult children were both now studying at university. He'd traveled to the city to handle some paperwork at the Bureau of Immigration. After a while, our conversation drifted, mostly small talk, like sports. The price of San Miguel compared to 10 years ago, the state of the roads in the south. Then he asked me how long I'd been over, and I said 8 months. And he raised an eyebrow and said, "Oh, just visiting." Or, I said the word girlfriend, and he gave me this small, careful smile. "Where's she from, son?" "Talisay," I said. "Family there." He gave a slow nod, not scolding them, just posing questions the way a physician might. Gentle, deliberate, as if he already anticipated their answers. "How long have you been together? Do you live in the condo, or with her mother? Does she stay with you, or does she have her own place? Are you sending her 20,000 pesos a month, or is it closer to 30? The roof repairs, was that your doing? And the cousin, the one applying for jobs in Manila, did he get hired yet?" The brother. He hadn't brought him up before. The slip had been unintentional. He noticed right away. The officer spoke up. "Where you from? Bohol? What landed you here? And have they questioned you yet, kid?" I gave truthful answers to everything. I'd held onto it for too long. The whole time, I studied his expression. He was skilled, stayed composed until the 3rd or 4th question. Then something shifted inside him. A sense of loss, maybe. Not quite sorrow, but something near. It wasn't rage. When I stopped talking, he stayed silent for what felt like ages. He lifted his beer, took a measured sip, glanced at the rugby on the screen. Then, finally, he spoke. "Brendan, just my name, softly. I haven't seen things this bad since moving to the Philippines." I began to argue, like anyone would. Trev, of course, disagreed. then calmly raised his hand. Just hear me out for a second, kid. That's when he hit me with something no one else had. Look, mate. Here's the truth no one bothers to explain, to guys or girls. Most of these women aren't out to deceive you. And that's what really gets people. If she turned out to be deceitful, everything would be simple. You'd recognize it, walk away, maybe drown your regrets in a bar like this, laugh it off as foolishness, and move on. But the ones who ruin you aren't the liars. They're the ones who truly care. They've spent their lives watching relatives marry foreigners, seeing families lifted out of hardship, 4 children sent to university, a home built back in the hometown. To them, that's what commitment looks like. The man doesn't just support his wife. He carries the weight of the entire family. Cousins, nephews, even the aunt's husband's nephew. The roof gets repaired, hospital bills vanish, kids attend the best schools, and cash envelopes arrive for the mother. Soon, you're the hero of the neighborhood. Someone even tells you as much, and you can't help but agree. But then he says it. You're already 3 steps down a ladder with no way back up. The brother returns jobless. The aunt's expectations pile up. Subscribe and maybe next month I'll take one of you with me to show you the other side of paradise. The cousin's job interviews become your problem. That's just the next 2 decades staring you in the face. There's no scenario where you pause and stay, only the slow, inevitable pull downward. The moment you pause, your feelings vanish. At least, that's how she sees it. That's how they all see it, and there's no ill intent behind it. That's what makes it sting the most. He finished his beer, met my eyes, and said, "I'm not giving you orders. I'm just saying what you've signed up for." I got back to the condo around 10, missed the ride, took the long way on foot. The pavement still held the day's heat. That sharp, smoky scent of sizzling skewers drifted from the vendor on West Johnson. The guys at the court hadn't stopped. Ball bouncing, sneakers scuffing. Somewhere 2 blocks away, someone was belting out a tune. Once inside, I dropped onto the kitchen stool, pulled up the AIB app, and scrolled. Every entry, every swipe. 8 months' worth. I tallied it all by hand on the back of a drugstore receipt. Roughly 38,000 euros, more or less. I stayed perched on the side of the mattress for what felt like forever. No tears came. No alcohol touched my lips. I simply remained there, motionless. The following day, I arranged to see Maravik at the Starbucks on the 3rd floor of Ayala Center. She assumed we'd be discussing holiday plans. She even showed up in the same white top and pulled back hair she'd worn the afternoon we first crossed paths at the bakery. I didn't confront her. I didn't raise my voice. By the time I reached the cafe, I'd already decided that losing my temper would only make me look weak. Instead, I ordered 2 coffees, took the seat across from her, and pushed the AIB statement across the table. I'd stopped at a copy shop on the way to print it. Then I said, "Maravik, this covers the last 8 months, 38,000 euros. I have 22,000 euros left in the world. I cannot do this anymore. I am not blaming you. I am telling you the number." She looked at the page. Her lips moved. I think she was converting in her head. She started to cry. Not loud. The ink blurred as tears dripped onto the paper. Her words stayed with me, the gentle, patient way she spoke them, as if breaking something down for someone who didn't quite grasp it. "Kuya, I thought you knew. A man who truly loves a woman also cares for her family. That's how love works here. If you can't do that, then you don't love us." And the hardest truth? She wasn't wrong. The hardest part remains this. Just sitting here. I stepped out of Ayala Center into Cebu City's sweltering October afternoon, my legs numb beneath me. I wandered for nearly an hour, passing Sacred Heart Parish, the entrance to IT Park, and a vendor hawking balut from a dented bucket on the curb. Eventually, I found myself in a dim carinderia in Lahug, spooning down a forgettable meal. From the table, I called Bridget back in Ennis. She answered after the 3rd ring. "I'm coming home," I told her, "as soon as I figure things out." "No, I told you so." Just silence on the other end. "Brendan," she agreed. "Yes, you can return. Mick will pick you up at Shannon. Just let us know the date." My tears splashed into the cereal. The woman from Carinderia acted like she hadn't noticed. In that moment, I'd never felt such overwhelming relief and foolishness at once. That same evening, I reserved my seat. Cebu to Doha, then on to Dublin. November 8th, no return. The following morning, I headed to Talisay to handle things the right way. I'd spent much of the night turning it over in my mind. In the Philippines, there are two ways to walk away from family. The first is the method you see in those YouTube clips: ghosting, swapping SIMs, catching a red-eye flight, and vanishing without a trace. The second takes more effort. I chose the second, mostly for Nanay Cora's sake. She placed her late husband's prayer beads into my palm. How could I abandon someone who'd trusted me like that? I arrived on a Saturday. Maravich was waiting at the entrance, her eyes red from tears. The children were away at school, and Nani Cora was in the kitchen preparing coffee. When I entered, she didn't speak, just slid a cup toward me and settled across the table, fingers laced together. I explained I needed to leave and return home. I made it clear I couldn't continue what we'd been doing. There was no point acting like it was just a short-term arrangement. I admitted, "Nane, I'm 55. My back's ruined. My pension won't be available for years. And I'm not the person I claimed to be. I take full responsibility for that. It's my fault, not yours." Nanay Cora listened without interruption. She didn't try to change my mind or ask for anything in return. Before I left, I gathered what I could. I covered the rent for the next 2 months, 14,000 pesos, sent straight to the landlord via GCash, so there'd be no confusion. The boys' school fees were settled through the end of the term, another 18,000 pesos. Then I handed Maravich an envelope with 30,000 pesos in cash, roughly 480 euros, and told her it was the last time. No arguments, just take it. I said she deserved someone who could give her more than I ever could, someone who'd be what she needed. I wasn't that man. I'd tried, but I wasn't. She wept at the door, and so did I. Nanay Cora embraced me and whispered, "God bless you, Tito Brendan. You've been good to us. Even now, you're good to us." She pressed the rosary back into my hand, the same way she'd given it to me the first time, insisting I keep it. So I did. I walked away without looking back, because if I had, I would have broken. The flight on November 8th stretched over 30 hours in total. Cebu to Doha took 8, then a 4-hour layover before the 7.5-hour leg to Dublin. I had 1 beer at the Cebu airport, and stuck to water after that. I rewatched a couple of Liam Neeson movies I'd seen before, tried to sleep but couldn't. Somewhere over Saudi Arabia, with the cabin lights dimmed and the sound of snoring around me, I let myself cry quietly for a few minutes. Then everything settled into place. Mick picked me up at Shannon. Bridget had asked him to go instead, saying she'd break down if she saw me herself. He wasn't one for words, Mick. A Cork man through and through. They only speak when necessary. At the arrival's gate, he gave my shoulder a quick pat, muttered, "All right, Brendan," tossed my bag into the boot, and drove me back to Ennis with the heater blasting because I was freezing in just a t-shirt on that November day. Bridget had a stew waiting. She set a bowl in front of me without a word, just sat across the table while I ate. That winter was tough. I won't pretend otherwise. For the first month and a half, I slept 12 hours a night, and still woke up drained. But I had my 22,000 euros in the AIB account, and the union pension coming in at 900 euros a month. That was my safety net. In a way, I was fortunate. I'd never owned a house, so there was nothing to lose. I'd just been renting in Birmingham for years before the back went, the drinking thing that I had to face. I'd been at it again on the way home, in the condo by myself that last fortnight. I took the pioneer pin out of my mother's old jewelry box at Bridget's, and I pinned it on the inside of my jacket. I'm not saying I'm a saint. I'm saying I made a decision, and I stuck to it, the way I'd stuck to a wall when I had to. 3 weeks at a time, then 6, then I stopped counting. It's been over a year now. I started walking, out the back lane in Ennis, down by the inch. Half an hour at first, then an hour. I began swimming at the community pool on Lees Road, going twice weekly. Gentle laps due to my back, but laps all the same. Within a month, the young attendant at reception recognized me by name. There's a kind of healing in that you can't purchase. By February 2025, 3 months after returning home, I took a part-time position at McNamara's Building Supplies on Tula Road. My role was behind the counter, helping young workers pick out materials. The owner, Pat McNamara, had worked with my father years back in the industry. He told me, "Brendan, I can't put you on the tools, but I can put you on the stool, and I'll give you honest pay. 20 hours a week at 13 euros an hour. It wasn't much. I've had my fill. These days, I spend 3 shifts a week perched on a stool behind the counter at McNamara's. Every time the door swings open, the scent of dry cement drifts in from the yard, and the young crew files in, picking up lintels, plasterboard, sacks of mortar, half of them clueless about what they actually need. That's where I step in, the old hand who knows the score, the one who shakes his head and says, 'No, lad, that joist won't hold for that span. Take this one instead.' It's the nearest thing to laying bricks I've done in years. As for Maravik, we traded a handful of messages over time, always civil. Then, in February 2025, she told me she'd met an Aussie bloke, Darren, working a mining gig in Cebu. By March, they were engaged. I sent her a short note, "Congratulations," and I meant it. Honestly, I hope Darren's got more to offer than I ever did. I wish the best for Nanakora's roof. May it stay strong, and I hope those kids at Sacred Heart graduate and find their way to a good college someday. That's no longer my responsibility, but I still wish it. Here's the thing, though. If there's any takeaway from all this, I've spent plenty of time turning it over on a bar stool at McNamara's. This isn't advice on romance. There are enough guys online spouting that stuff. Don't hand over cash early on. Don't cover their relatives' bills. And don't say yes to every big celebration. They aren't entirely off base, but they're overlooking what really matters. To me, it's definitely a cultural difference. You don't court someone there the same way you would in Limerick, Leeds, or Liverpool. Instead, you're welcomed into a family. The woman is the entryway, but the family is the whole structure, and that structure includes a leaky roof, an aunt who needs supplies, and a sibling returning from somewhere. That's not them being difficult. It's just who they are. It's how things function in that society. They wouldn't be who they are today without it. My error, my own error, was stepping inside without noticing the words above the entrance. No one presented me with paperwork. No one explained the conditions. I simply agreed to another cup of tea, then another, and another, until suddenly I was signing ownership papers for a home I couldn't sustain. That's the whole of it. If you've got the means to support 3 lifetimes, then by all means, proceed with my full support. But if you're like most of us, without that kind of security, then move cautiously. Take your time, and if someone calls you well-known in the barangay, treat it as a caution, not praise. That's the lesson, nothing more. That was Brendan, a Limerick mason who traveled to Cebu, searching for a fresh start, and discovered something he couldn't put into words. Before we part ways, I'd like to share a few final thoughts. This narrative stands out because it defies the usual patterns of the stories we share here. There's no clear antagonist to expose, no deception to highlight for dramatic effect. Maravich isn't the bad guy. Nanay Cora isn't either. Even Raymark, who never landed that call center position, isn't cast as one. Instead, they're a family shaped by generations of belief. When an outsider arrives with opportunity, everyone moves forward together. It's not cruelty driving them. It's the reality of a nation without a safety net, a century of overseas work woven into its identity, and a faith that demands loyalty to kin. It isn't incorrect, just costly. And the reality is, most viewers here won't have the means for it. There's no sugarcoating that fact. The truth is, most of you simply can't. If you've been exchanging messages with a friendly woman on Messenger each morning, if you've convinced yourself you're not like those guys in the clips, if you've got a flight booking page pulled up on your screen right now, stop. Take a step back. Think about what's really going on. Have you heard the story Trev put to Brendan? Have you been clued in about the brother? Or the roof? Ever heard about the cousin yet? They're on their way. Not because you're being tricked, but because that's how things work where you're headed. Brendan made it out with 22,000 euros. His health, his sister, and a part-time gig stacking shelves at a hardware store in Ennis. He's one of the few who got that far. Most guys in his shoes walk away with nothing, and many can't even return because the place they called home doesn't exist anymore. Cheers to Brendan for sharing this. It takes real courage to admit when the choices were all yours. If this resonates, give it a like, follow the channel, and pass it on to that mate of yours who's been unusually quiet about his messages lately. Got your own story? Leave it below. We check every one, and some of our best episodes start right there. Keep your heads up, lads. Treat yourself and those close to you with care and compassion. Until our next visit, take care in the Philippines.